Greetings. Today is a holiday. We should have had class, but I only realized this morning that it was a holiday. I suppose if I had been in the US and it were the 4th of July, of course, I would note that it was a special holiday for my country. Pakistan has also become, to a little bit of an extent, my country, but unfortunately, there are things that I don't remember. And I trust you're having a good holiday, hopefully with family today. Because today is a holiday, our class video segments will be shorter. In fact, our class video itself, of course, will be missing because we're not having that class as I had planned. So the first video segment will be by Dr. Campbell. He will be introducing what's called either the first aorist tense forms or the weak aorist. I was taught to call it the first aorist, and in our textbook, we are taught to call it the weak aorist. I'm not sure why it got the name weak aorist, and chapter 12, section 12.1, those forms are called the strong aorist, perhaps because there are so many of them, or they occur so often, and they're irregular. There are the verbs that are commonly used. I go and I went, and so on. You know how those are. I eat and I ate. Those forms in Greek are also very irregular. The weak aorist, or the first aorist, as we learn beginning on page 108 in our textbook, is actually the regular aorist in a way. That is, a general rule will be established for the aorist tense, and the irregular strong aorist will be contrasted with that. The first aorist, or the weak aorist, as Dr. McIver refers to it, and many grammarians do refer to it, is characterized by three things that I will use to introduce this tense to you. Now, keep in mind that we are not talking about different meanings when we say strong aorist or weak aorist. We're talking only about grammatical forms. The essential quality of the aorist tense, which, to speak in generalities, is to sum up the action that is described or communicated by the verb form, or to look at the action, as it were, from outside rather than inside. If we look at the action from inside, we usually use the present tense, or perhaps what we will later learn is the imperfect tense. Indeed, you will hear it mentioned by Dr. Campbell in his video because he teaches that tense much earlier than we do. But you get the idea, because you know the present tense, that this idea of being inside what happens, watching it happen, I am seeing, I am doing, I am loosing, or they are loosing, is an action that is occurring before our eyes, as it were. Whereas in the aorist tense, we are summing up in general sense. We are summing up what happened. I saw, I went, I loosed. Now, again, this will be translated right now by the English past tense. And so you will get used to the aorist tense as being the past tense in Greek. But it's not called aorist for nothing. Just offhand, I can't recall what aorist means, but you can look it up in a great research encyclopedia like Wikipedia. I'm speaking a little facetiously there. Wikipedia is not a great research encyclopedia at all. In fact, I suspect if you have done college papers at all at the BA honors level and you used Wikipedia as a source, you may have had some difficulties with a professor about that, because it generally is not reliable. But for the definitions of words, or you need some quick information about something without getting into it in detail, or you just want to know what some term means, it's helpful for that. Again, not always reliable. Back to the subject. The characteristic, or let's say the characteristics, the main characteristics of the aorist, of the first aorist, or the weak aorist, as it's called, are actually three. Let's read together. First of all, I don't have my Kindle app set up on this laptop. I've been having some significant laptop issues, and they seem to be ongoing. I will have that very soon, and also a better webcam for video. But if you look on page 108, you will see very quickly the aorist indicative active of luo, which means we have changed verb forms. He's using luo again as an example, as do most grammars for whatever reason. I have a friend who taught theology, or teaches theology still in some ways in Germany. He's now retired. He's told me once that they use the verb paiduo, I teach, or I train. We get the word pediatrics from it, from training, from doctors who are doctors for children. Has to do with children. Even in Greek, it had to do with training children, of course. But in English, for whatever reason, we tend to use the verb luo, I guess because it's a short one. And you'll notice on page 108, he does say the weak aorist is called the first aorist under paragraph 12.2.1. And he gives the pattern as I loosed, you loosed, he, she, it loosed, we loosed, you loosed, they loosed. The past tense in English, he gives the forms as elusa, elusas, elusin, elusamin, elusate, elusan, or sorry, elusan, to pronounce it correctly. And then he says the weak aorist uses the same verb stem as the present. I'm going to say that actually it's easier to learn if we don't say that. Instead of using his system of what we will call the augment plus the present stem, luo, lu, and the ending sa, sas, sin, I'm going to suggest that we learn that there are different stems for verbs. Now, please keep in mind that almost always a verb cannot have a second aorist or a strong aorist form and a weak aorist form. It either has a strong aorist form or a weak aorist form. So here we're not talking about, again, we're not talking about differences of translation in the sense that the first aorist means something different from the second aorist. No, it's simply the form and how the tense is formed, how the verb stem changes, and the endings that are added. Perhaps you've already noticed that these endings of the weak aorist or the first aorist are completely different from the strong aorist endings. So I'm going to put my book down just a second and share my screen with you and call up my PowerPoint slides. And we're going to look at the weak aorist tense. And let's see, I think I forgot to tell my program. No, I didn't. There it is. Okay. Let's see. For some strange reason, let me end that. Let me share my screen again. I think, yes, I didn't see it the first time. Now let's get our little spotlight that we use and move some things around here on my screen that you don't see, but I do. Again, we're looking at the weak or aorist or the first aorist tense. And I'm going to suggest that we think of the weak aorist, or actually we could call it the regular aorist, because the second aorist that we learned last week is actually irregular. And you notice that the aorist tense of estheo, I eat or I am eating, which is the progressive idea that usually is part of the Greek present tense, is very different from ephagon, the second aorist form of estheo, I eat, ephagon, I ate, and the endings are on, s, in, almond with omicron, ete, on, and the first person singular and the third person plural, I and we, look the same. So only the context can tell us if it's I or they. It's not that way with the first aorist or the more regular aorist tense. Now, even though it's regular, you're going to notice that there are some things that happen because of verb stems that don't like the characteristic sigma of the weak aorist. We have the augment, which we learned last week, is typical of the aorist indicative. We're still in the indicative mood. When we leave this mood, and it won't be too long, we will come to infinitives, and you will notice that we will drop this augment, and the infinitive will not have it. When we leave this indicative mood and drop the augment, we will also often drop, not always, often drop the past time in the English translation because the aorist tense does not necessarily convey past time, but it does, at least most grammarians say it does, if it has the augment. In the augment only appears in the indicative mood. Now, so let's take the augment and we'll take the present stem, but we're going to add, under Dr. McIver's scheme, the ending sa, sas, sen, samin, sate, san. And so we get the forms elusa, elusas, elusen, and so on. I loosed, you loosed, he, she, it loosed, and then the plurals the same. Again, the aorist tense is past tense only because we're in the indicative mood and we have an augment. It might also be past tense in English because, and in Greek for that matter, because of the context, but we don't know that because we don't have any context if we only have one verb form. But I'm going to suggest that there's an easier way to learn this, and it will not only be easier now, it will help us later. Again, remember that the augment, as it were, I like to say, throws the verb into past time. Other teachers would not like me saying throws the verb, but it helps me to remember what the aorist tense is and what the augment does if I say it throws the verb. But I'm going to suggest that the way to remember the aorist tense, and I'm going to take a different verb, laleo, which is a contract verb, if you remember, from chapter 5, an epsilon omega verb. That means I speak or I utter, I am speaking or I am uttering. And I'm going to suggest that we add the sigma not to the endings as Dr. McIver does, but to the stem. So we say the sigma is the essential part of the aorist stem added to the aorist stem that will make it into an aorist stem, to which we add the endings a, as, in, amin, ate, an. And so our endings will always be the same for the aorist tense. A, as, in, and notice we come up with the same endings, except this time the contract verb is changed from laleo to lales. The contract, as the word the epsilon, lengthens in contract verbs. It doesn't contract because the sigma is a consonant. The sigma is added to the strong aorist. I should have put perhaps the using luo first. We would have elusa. Lus being the aorist stem and a being the ending, not sas, but a. If we put the sigma here, then we don't put it here. But we end up as looking like the verbs look the same as they do with Dr. McIver. And English is used in the past tense to translate this verb because of the augment. Elalesa, I spoke. Elalesas, you singular spoke. Elalesen, he, she, it spoke. Or if we had luo, it would be elusa, I loosed. Elusas, you loosed. Elusen, he, she, it loosed. Notice the translation is the same. It's the English past tense. And the forms are the same as in our textbook. It's just that I think it's easier to remember if we think the aorist, the weak aorist is formed by adding sigma to the present stem and making an aorist stem with sigma. And so our forms, if we add the plurals, will come out looking the same as with Dr. McIver, except the thinking is different. We don't think in terms of sa, sas, sen, samin, sate, san. We think of the endings as being simply a, as, in, amin, ate, an. And the stem we think of a. The aorist stem of laleo is lales, and we add the augment for pastime in the indicative elalesa, elalesas. These endings will look the same as they do in your textbook. It's just that the thinking is different. I'm thinking in terms of an aorist stem. So a verb has a present stem and a verb has an aorist stem. And later on, we'll learn the perfect stem. And we'll learn that the perfect is formed by what we call reduplication. Leluk, and that kappa will be the defining consonant. And then we'll have endings that look very similar to the aorist until we get down here. But more of that when we get to the perfect tense much later, actually in Greek 3. Now, again, chapter 5 and chapter 8 introduced to us to the contract verbs, the epsilon omega verbs. Poieo is one we know well, and agapao is an alpha omega verb that we remember among many others. Those verbs usually change in their augment from epsilon to eta because, no, sorry, I'm not talking, this is not about augment. Let's forget that. These verbs change when in their aorist stem by lengthening. You add the sigma and it becomes not la less, but la lace. And not agapao, but gap asa. Asa, the alpha changes, lengthens, we say, to eta. So here are some verbs that we know. Horao, and the strong aorist is adon. Doesn't look anything like horao, I see. I saw, adon. You saw, adis. He, she, it saw, adin. The strong aorist is very irregular. Then the simple weak aorist, W stands for weak and A for aorist. The simple weak aorist, luo, is formed by adding sigma to the aorist stem and making the present stem, sorry, and making it what I want to call an aorist stem. If we call this the aorist stem, then the endings are a, as, in, amin, ate, an. So, elusa, I loosed. Elusas, you loosed. If we have a contract verb, which is weak aorist, most of them are. I can't think of a contract verb that is a strong aorist. You might go back to page 106 and check that list. Actually, you should have it memorized. Don't forget to keep memorizing page 106, the strong aorist forms. You need to have those because they're so common. Notice that the epsilon lengthens to eta. The same thing with the alpha omega verbs. The alpha lengthens to eta. But notice what happens with the augment. Laleo begins with a consonant, so you simply add epsilon. Elalesa, I spoke. But agapao begins with a vowel, alpha. So that vowel alpha lengthens also to eta. So I love, or I am loving, agapo, this contracts. I loved, aorist tense, indicative, augment, past time, becomes agapesa. Here we have the alpha that lengthened to eta, but also here we have the augment that lengthens to eta. Because alpha plus an augment, which normally would be epsilon, will cause it to become usually, not always, there are a few exceptions, but usually it becomes eta. Agapesa, I loved. Agapesas, you loved. Agapesen, he, she, it loved, and so on. So what you need to do, first of all, and primarily, is to think, okay, the weak aorist, the first aorist, is formed by adding sigma and the aorist endings. So I have an aorist stem loose for luo, and the endings are a, as, in, amin, ate, on. And my, I need to remember the augment, the aorist stem with sigma, and the endings, a, as, in, and so on. Very heavily alpha endings. And that's very important to remember. Actually, if you remember those two things about the weak aorist, you have the essentials. It adds sigma to the stem to make the aorist stem, and the endings are mostly alpha based. Alpha, elusa, elusas, elusin. Now there's a different one where on the third person singular, he, she, it, loosed is epsilon instead of alpha. But otherwise, they're all based on alpha, amen, ate, on. So perhaps it would be good to start thinking a, as, in, amen, ate, on. A, as, in, amen, ate, on. Just as I suggested that you do with the present stem, the present active, o, es, e, amen, ete, usi. And then with the deponent verbs like paru omai, e, etai, amitha, estha, antai. Now with the aorist tense, we've added two more sets of endings. Last time we added the strong aorist endings on, es, in, amen, ete, on. And this time we're adding the weak aorist, or the first aorist endings, which are, the way I teach, a, as, in, amen, ate, on. So maybe you want to add a line to the song. If you made up a song, like we used to in Greek class, oh my goodness, over 50 years ago. You remember o, es, e, and et, usi, o, es, e. Okay, and then we would add the aorist tense. I don't even want to subject you to that terrible sound. But, and besides, Western music is not your music, and you need to sing with your music. But a song, anything that helps you to remember the endings, and that, because now we have 4 sets of endings, and of course we keep adding vocabulary words, and so there's continual memory. So don't get behind. Now this is not the last video for this week. Our homework will be from exercise 12.2. And so we need to cover the other sections. What happens when you add sigma, for example, to a verb like blepo? It doesn't become blep plus sigma bleps. It does become bleps, but it's with a psi, bleps, blepsa. I saw, I looked. And so there's some additional rules or additional forms we need to keep in mind in section 12.2 simply because of adding the sigma. But if you remember sigma and the alpha-based endings, you've gone a long way to learning the aorist tense, as long as you learn the vocabulary words. So this is video segment 2. Remember, in place of the class. Now, this is a short class, but this class will be made up of at least 3 parts, maybe 4. The first segment, you hopefully have already watched. That's the one by Dr. Campbell. And now the second one with me. Third one probably also with me. And we might add a 4th as well. So make sure you watch all of the video segments, do the homework, and thirdly, give the Moodle quiz once you've gotten down the endings of the weak aorist. But don't do the Moodle quiz just yet until you've seen all of the video segments. And the third video segment I haven't made yet. I had to change my plans because of today's holiday, but I will do it tomorrow and post it hopefully by tomorrow afternoon, Wednesday afternoon. God bless you. Your homework will be a little shorter, not quite as much, but there will be homework. So make sure that you get going on your homework. Don't get behind with learning vocabulary words.